Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. This is Mike Hoffpauir. I'm a national tournament director, FIDE arbiter, a member of the U.S. Chess Executive Board, and I want to welcome everyone to this session today. As we get started, I need everyone to keep in mind that, unfortunately, this is not a raise your hand interactive kind of session where we can take your questions live and and hear your voice and all that sort of stuff. It's completely, if you will, one way. Um, we do have additional national tournament directors who are part of this call today in order to get their perspectives on some of the different issues and experiences that they've had in their careers. So joining us in today, in addition to myself for today's call, we have national tournament director and international arbiter Chris Bird, and we also have NTD Ernie Schlick. And at some point, I expect National Tournament Director Jeff Weewell to join if he's not done so already. So, 3 or 4 National Tournament Directors are on this call, and we will all have chances to weigh in and give our perspectives as we go through this. I trust that to get the most out of this, everybody's taking a shot at the questions that were in the pre-read that we sent, because really that's what will enhance your learning experience. So we're going to go ahead and dive in. All right, there's the agenda we're going to follow today. We're going to talk about pairings and awarding prizes. Okay. So, typical questions that you get as a tournament director, involving pairings and prizes. I mean, there's not many events that go by, at least in my experience, where some player doesn't walk up to me and, I don't understand why I'm playing white. The rule book says I should be playing black, or why am I playing this particular player when I would have thought I should be playing that other player by this particular rule in the rule book. Or especially when we're doing accelerated pairings, parents coming up and not understanding how accelerated pairings work. Why is my kid who won a game playing somebody who lost their first game, that sort of stuff. So you get all sorts of strange questions. And usually, and they're good questions because people just don't understand. But I got to tell you, probably the worst answer that you can give as a tournament director, and you may hear me emphasize this multiple times today, you cannot give an answer that is like this. Oh, well, that's what the computer said. And the computer's got approved pairing specifications that were all approved by U.S. Chess. So what the computer says is the answer. If you have to do that, that's going to lower your credibility significantly in the eyes of the players and the participants, because they can't get a straight answer out of you, and saying the computer's the answer is not the answer. So hopefully that this work that we do today opens your eyes a little bit more, and also encourages you to dig into the rule book and really understand. And as you pair your next tournament, try to figure out why the computer is pairing certain players the way they were, if in your own mind they're not. It's different than what you would have thought. And a very good practice for a TD, especially when you have a small tournament and you have a little bit of time and you're not playing an event, is to make yourself a set of pairing cards and let the computer do the pairing, and you pair it by hand and see how it comes out. And then try to understand where the differences are occurring, because sometimes, I got to tell you, the computer's wrong. And many times when the computer is wrong, it's because there's some switch that's set in WinTD or SwissSys that you weren't aware of, or that you clicked on for your last tournament and forgot to turn off for this one. So you really have to be careful with the pairings programs, whether it's in the pairings or when you're allocating prizes, that you set the computer to do what you want it to do, as opposed to letting it do what it's going to do. And that will get you in some hot water if you're not careful. We'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through this. So let's talk about some of the fundamentals of Swiss pairings. This is clearly designed, in theory, if you got a 16-player tournament and everybody's winning games like they're supposed to, and there's not draws and people withdrawing or people taking buys, that's sort of, it's designed to give you one perfect score after 4 rounds. But it's not that It doesn't work like that in practice because people take draws, because people show up late for the tournament and then get a half-point buy in the first round. Or, you know, as you have an unrated player who's, well, was he really unrated? Oh, gee, halfway through the tournament, you find out, no, he's got a FIDE rating of 1900. So there's lots of things that can complicate, you know, what you may have thought was going to be a simple tournament, you know, in Swiss style. So when you start peeling back the onion and looking in more of the details of Swiss, it seems like it's straightforward. But I got to tell you, that sequence that you see there, avoiding players meeting twice, all the way down through alternating colors, you have to remember that sequence as you try to resolve pairing issues and determine pairings in an event, because that sequence is just critical to your ability to apply the rules in the correct manner, as opposed to, well, you know, I just think this person should be playing black, or, you know, their ratings are too close together, I'm not gonna pair those two people, that sort of thing. So remember this sequence. We'll see it time and again as we go through the presentation today.
May I interrupt, Mike?
Yeah.
I've met several tournament directors that think avoid players meeting twice is an absolute mandate. It's not allowed, but it's just the most important. It is permissible.
Yeah, especially if you got, you know, you're playing 5 rounds and you only got 7 people, you know, unless you turn it into a round robin. You know, if you try to do it as a Swiss, it's gonna go nuts on you. So it's like Ernie said, if you have a small tournament and you have a lot of rounds, you can definitely be playing somebody more than once. So all the variables you got to deal with, you can see us, you know, the whole list of them there. And as you looked at this in your preview work, somebody asked a question a little while ago on the website about, on the email about pairings when you got families that enter tournaments. Well, 2 things about that. Number one, you know, some programs by default, and Swiss Sys is one, that it generally won't pair people who have the same last name. And so you have to be careful. And because sometimes you may have 2 people named Jones and are not related in any way, shape, or form. And if you happen to have the system checked to not, to not pair people with the same last name, you'll be okay. But just be careful with people with the same last name. And yeah, they can mess with your pairings. But I also tell those people, look, you know, after if we've got a 5-round tournament, when I get into round 4 and round 5, and both of you are in prize contention, if you get paired against one another, that's it. You know, and it's the same with, you know, players making requests to not play. You know, like if Ernie requests not to play Chris because Ernie and Chris play every other night at the club and they really don't want to play each other in the tournament, well, when we get to the later rounds and they're the only 2 players in the score group, or there are 3 players in the score group, and, you know, it doesn't make sense to drop one of them down. It is what it is, because a request to not play someone isn't an obligatory. You're never going to play that player. It's not like that. It's a person may request, and the tournament director is not obligated to honor it. But most TDs will say, yeah, in the first couple of rounds, we should be okay. But as we get into the later rounds, I can't guarantee it anymore. And it's the same with teams when you have teams in tournaments. Okay, so we're going to play around with this tournament that you've had a look at. You know, we've got some round 2 results, you know, results through round 2. It's a 4-round tournament. That's where we are with 10 players in this tournament. And here you can see the standings. So you may want to keep that on the side as we talk about, you know, those questions that are down there at the bottom. And just to show you the questions in more detail and what the options are that you're going to get a chance to play with. So keep your standings off to the side. And one thing I'll note about standings, it's always been a good practice, in my opinion, and I've heard it from other TDs as well. When I run out standings, I post the one that's in standing sequence, and I usually have the tie breaks off, even if there's trophies involved. I usually have the tie breaks off, for the first 2 or 3 rounds of the tournament. And then I'll turn them on in the last couple rounds so people understand where they sit as regards their tie breaks. Because tie breaks in the first and second round, sometimes even the third round in a 5-ranked tournament, doesn't really mean that much just yet. And they don't influence the pairings. They just affect how the prizes get awarded. Whereas, tournaments that are pure money tournaments, all you need is tie breaks turned off. And you got to watch that. If you had a trophy tournament last weekend and a cash tournament this weekend, don't forget to turn those tie breaks off. Because otherwise, when you see your standings, they're going to be in tie break sequence, and you're going to be sitting there wondering, why is the 2100 with 3 points on top of the 2400 with 3 points in your standings chart? That's because you got tie breaks that are kicking in, and you didn't turn the tie break settings off. When I do have a tournament that has both trophies and prizes together, I usually will print out an extra set of standings for myself that are in tie break order and non-tie break order, so that I've got both of them together, so I can kind of see how things are at play. And that'll come into play a little bit more in a few moments. You'll hear more about having both of those sets of standings available, and so that you can quickly reference them. But I usually only post one set when we're in a tournament like that. Okay. So the first question we're going to deal with is, who is A going to play in round 3, and who gets what colors? Well, you're in round 3, so there's not a color equalization issue. There's one player's got a couple points, and the 1.5 group has 4 players in it, and one of those players is unrated. So somebody from the 1.5 score group is going to play up, or if you want to think about it, the guy that's in the 2-point score group by himself plays down. But in this case, it works out pretty much the same. Player B's got the highest rating, so it would appear that B should, play up, or, is going to face A, or if A drops down, B's still the highest rated player in the old 1.5 group, so still A and B face one another. So let's check. Well, they haven't played each other, and that's important, because you remember the first thing in the prioritization was players not playing each other more than once. So that's the first thing we check. They haven't played. That's okay. Next, color histories. And you can see the color histories there for A and B. A's played black-white. B's played white-black. That's great. So A, as the player with the 2 points, is due to play black, and B is due to play white. And this is good. And A's going to play black because, he's got 2 points. The black's 1.5. And in this case, the color alternation, really works well for this matchup. So we can pair these players. So the answer to question 1 is board 1 is B versus A. A is playing black against player B. And that one's pretty straightforward. It'll get more fun now. So now we get into this question of J. Who's J going to play in round 3, and what colors is J going to get to play that game? Well, we used one of the players out of the 1.5 point score group already. That's player B. So all that's left is C, E, and J. And there's also 2 players that have to get paired from the 1.0 score group. Those are players D and H. But now we've got an odd number in the 1.5 score group, so we got to do something about that, because I can't pair it just yet. So I'm going to drop somebody down to the 1 point score group, and that's following, Rule 29D. So let's review the players' opponents and color histories first. Remember, that's step 1 is who's played who. So you can see I've highlighted in red and underlined, and I underlined in case there is anyone who's got problems distinguishing colors, but the underlined players is where someone has played somebody else in one of those 2 score groups. So C has played H, for example. E has played J. It's in the same score group. So you can see there is a little bit going on here in terms of players that have played one another, and that's important as you start thinking about your pairings. So now you got to start thinking, okay, so who am I going to drop down? So do we drop E or J? E or J is what you got to think about. Fortunately, neither one has played C. H is the only one's played them. So we're not going to drop H. Okay, so it's either E or J. So we're going to drop E in this case because keeping J in the score group preserves Rule 29 Delta 1, which is don't drop the unrated player. In this case, it also happens to benefit color alternation. So it's okay to do that. Now, I will show you at the end of this whole discussion that you can come up with pairings that work, if you do drop the unrated player down. Is it a sin? Are you going to go to jail? Is somebody going to turn you into the tournament director certification committee or the rules committee and you lose your license as a TD? No, I don't think so. But in this particular case, there's no clear reason why you need to drop the unrated player down. And that's really what that rule is written for, is that, keep the unrated player in play in the score group that they're in, and let a player who's got a rating drop down. I know in practice, some tournament directors will take that unrated player and for sake of thinking about it and planning, just give the unrated player a rating that's just a few points less than the lowest rated player in that score group. And then they drop the player down in order to pair the round. But in this case, we can preserve Rule 29 Delta 1, not dropping an unrated player, and it works out great in terms of colors as well. So that's going to leave C and J, C our 1900 and our unrated player J in the 1.5 score group, and they're going to both get their due colors. So C is going to play black against J, who's going to play white. So the answer here, this one is D, none of the above. That's because J is playing white against C. Okay, so now we still have question number 3. Who's going to play I? So remember, there's 6 players that remain to be paired. We've already taken care of C and J, so they're no longer in the mix. But I've got E, D, H, F, G, and I left to pair. So E is now considered for pairing purposes part of the 1.0 score group because that's who you drop down from the 1.5 group. So now we have 3 players in that, quote, 1.0 score group, E, D, and H. They're all sitting in there. And I've got 3 players in the score group that's under there. So now we do just like before. Look at the color histories to see who has played one another. And now it's starting to get kind of crazy. If you look at I's played both D and H. Okay? F has played against E already. So it can get complicated because we're in the second round, going into the third round of the tournament. So to even out that 1.0 score group, we're going to drop a player down. So we're going to drop H because H is the lowest rated player in the score group. This leaves us with D and E getting paired against one another on board 3. So that takes care of D and E. They're out of the mix now. And that works out great for those 2 players for color alternation. And it also makes sense because when you look at it, E was the 1.5, a player with 1.5 points. E should be playing the highest player out of the next score group down. And in this case, that's D. And that's who he's playing. So we still got H, F, G, and I who we have to pair. So by dropping H down, we can see that right away, H can't play against I. It can only play against F or G. So applying, if I throw color alternation in there, it looks pretty safe to pair H against G because they've had opposite colors in the first 2 rounds, as you can see. And to pair F against I. Well, maybe not. But H should be playing the highest rated player from the 1-point score group because H, actually from the 0-point score group, I'm sorry. So it should be from the 1-point score group. It should be from the 0-point score group. And that's F. And F's got that 1450 rating. So H with the 1295 drops, is going to play against F. And so those two players had the same colors. They have the same color sequence, white, black, white, black. And you can see that in the up above. So that's going to leave you with board 5 as I versus G. And black is going to, and G is going to get his due color, which is black. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, can I just say, so there is, when you're working through these pairings, there are rules. And if you look at, I think it's like 29E5 that talks about the rules for transpositions and interchanges. There is a reason, so it would make complete sense to put H against G and F against I, because you do correct the color issues here. However, there are some further rules that why we don't do this. And H against F and G against I are the natural pairings. And those are what we need to look at. And then we can make transpositions and interchanges amongst that within certain limitations. It's the 80-point rule and the 200-point rule, depending on whether you're looking at alternation or equalization. Mm-hmm. So 80 points works for, you have an 80-point limit for alternation and a 200-point rule for equalization. And if you actually switched F and G around and paired H against G and F against I, because we're just doing it for alternation, meaning white, black, white, as opposed to, in round 4 where you're looking to equalize and give someone 2 whites, 2 blacks, you only have 80 points to play with. And so the difference between the F player rated 1450 and G rated 1300 is actually 150 points. And so because that's over the 80-point limit, it gets a little complicated and technical. You can all go look at 29E5 afterwards and look at some of this transposition and interchange wording, which really is complicated. But I mean, the long and the short of it is we're out of our threshold that we're allowed to use to just correct alternation. So we don't pair H against G and F against I, even though that actually fixes all the colors, color problems that we could, because it's just over the 80-point rule. So we stay with the natural pairings, which was the lowest guy in the 1-point score group against the highest rated guy in the 0-point score group, as long as they haven't played each other, which they haven't. And then we leave, G playing I.
And that's exactly the kind of question that a player is going to come up and ask you. Is going to be, I don't understand. If I'm F, I don't understand why I'm playing against H. We both had the same colors. Why shouldn't I be playing? Why am I not playing against I, or why am I not playing against G? It doesn't make any sense to me. And that's you're going to get that kind of a question in this situation. Thanks, Chris.
One thing a tournament director might do also, especially if somebody's questioning a pairing, unless you think they may have a valid point which would actually cause you to change pairings, if it's like just a parent asking, you might tell the parent, I can't answer that right now, but come back and see me in half an hour or 15 minutes and I'll be able to explain it to you.
Yeah, because, you're trying to get the round started on time, and those kinds of things. And usually, especially in scholastics tournaments, about 80% of the time, it's the parent, or some person who's the coach who's coaching that high school team or junior high team. That's the person coming up and asking you. And then, and sometimes they're being quite confrontational about it, which is not unusual. I don't understand, you're doing this wrong, and that sort of thing. So you just have to be careful, because there are customers, and you getting confrontational in response just really, really doesn't work. It heatens the rhetoric. And if you attended any of the first round of seminars we gave about 3 weeks ago, one of the issues that comes up is unruly parents. And some parents or coaches can get unruly when it comes to pairings, especially as you get into later rounds of a tournament. They don't understand why their player or players or playing who they've been paired against, because this is what you should be doing by the rule book, they'll be claiming. And you just have to, and if you need, hey, give me 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half hour, so I can get the round started, we get things going, and I'll research it and get it all in, in the rule book and lay things out for you. So I think Ernie's suggestion is a good one there. So now we're going to complicate things a little bit. We're going to add, a new tournament with 11 players now. We have 11 players, and there's 2 unrateds in that batch. We've got people taking buys, half-point buys in the tournament, so which also adds to the complexity.
Mike?
Yeah.
Just quickly, folks, this is a really good example. The difference between the standings view here that Mike is showing and the wall chart view previously, if you can just go back one slide, Mike.
Yeah.
Look how difficult this is to try and pair based on the wall chart, which is in, I think, rating order and not in score order. I mean, you've got a 1.5, like number 10 player there, and you've got to look all over the place to get people that are in the score groups and various things along those lines. So when you're trying to work out pairings and come up with an answer to questions, it's so much easier to do it in standings order than it is in the wall chart order. Sorry, Mike, go ahead.
That's okay. And there's our standings chart. And again, I've got this one, without tie breaks, because that's what I like to use when I pair is have those tie breaks turned off, so it doesn't confuse you. Because that's what the players are looking, especially in those first few rounds, for those tie breaks to be turned off. And if you start posting tie breaks at the end of the first round, I mean, it just makes no sense to the players.
Yeah. Mike, and just quickly, one other point, and putting it without tie breaks means that the standard order of ordering the players is by score and then by rating. So, if you don't have it in, with tie breaks off, it's automatically the pairing programs are going to put it in that order. So when you start a tournament, everyone's on 0. That's why the wall chart, the standings are in rating order. So, and that's what you need to use. That's initial order to get your top half versus bottom half list of people.
And that'll give you your natural pairings. All right. So now let's introduce the questions we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about somebody's going to get a forced buy in round 4. That's an issue because we've got 2 unrated players, one of whom only has a half a point. So kind of sticks out like a sore thumb about, hey, maybe that player should get the buy. We're going to talk about Y's game against Z and who gets what colors. And we're going to talk about the round 4 game for player T and, what color is player T going to get. All right, so let's dive in. And again, we're going to, use our sequence that we introduced early. So that helps us keep straight. So the event's got 11 players. It's round 4, so now color equalization is definitely going to be in play. There's 2 unrateds. And the top 2 score groups both have 2 players in them. While the next 2 score groups down, the 1.5 and the 1 pointer, each have 3 players. And then we got a player with a half a point that's an unrated player. So it's pretty quick to see that, okay, I can pair the 2 2.5s, I can pair the 2 2.0s. And so they get to play each other. But who gets what colors? We'll take a look at that later. But let's address the first question right now. And that first question is all about who's going to get that forced buy in round 4. So the situation is it P, that unrated player? Although P's got the lowest score, if P doesn't get a 4th game, their rating, they won't get a provisional rating. And Jeff Weevil emphasized the point in our last seminar in this same subject matter, which is that it's more than just getting the 4th game and getting a provisional rating. Because you can have a rating after 3 games, but it's not going to get published in the rating supplement. That's the problem. And Ernie, go ahead and tell you a story about how that all came to being, through history.
Okay. For those who don't know it, I've been directing since '73, so I've got quite a history. Originally, the rating supplement was created once every 2 months and sent out by mail. All the rating reports were sent in by mail, and this really delayed the amount of time that a player would show up even on the rating supplement, because they didn't have the internet where you could find out their interim ratings. So that was the basis behind this. It was extremely important to get that unrated player their 4 games as quickly as possible, both for pairing purposes and for the happiness of the player, which is just as important. In the modern day, with the internet, ratings going in within virtually days, if not the same night, and rating supplements coming out every month, and with the interim ratings available on the internet, this does not become as important as it used to be. And as a matter of fact, Rule 28L2 says that if it's an unrated player in the bottom score group and they're the only one there, it is perfectly okay to give them the bye. What is good then, if you do that, is try and find an unrated game for them so they get their 4th game out of the tournament.
Right.
Thank
you, Bernie. So, in this event, what we've got to do is we've got to take a look at that 1-point score group to identify who's going to get our forced bye. Since for this exercise, we're not going to give it to Pete. So I've got 3 players, the 1,200, the 1,000, and the 900. And the lowest rated player in that 1.0 score group, the 900, gets the bye. But there's 2 reasons, not just because there's the lowest rated player. It's also because R has not had a bye in an earlier round. If R had taken a half-point bye in round 1, then you would not be using R to give the forced bye to, because that would have mean the player would have gotten 1.5 points just on byes in the tournament, and that's not right. So then you'd have to jump up to player S and check to see whether or not that player had taken a bye. And if it's not player S, you go to player U. And if it's not that, so it can get to be interesting. So player R is the answer, and player R is going to be the player that we're going to use as the forced bye as we go forward. Okay. So question 2 talks about player Y and what color is she going to get in her game against player Z. So got to start by looking at who you played and your color histories and so forth. And we know that these 2 players have not played each other. That's definite. They have not played each other. Both are due to play white. Well, right? Well, maybe not. Because both players have the same color history in rounds 2 and 3, you really have to back up to where their player histories are different. In this case, it's round 1. Y had a game and played black. Z had a bye. So Z had taken a half-point bye in round 1. So that means Y is due to play white for color equalization. So Y gets to play white because of color equalization. The fact that they had, they may look like they're both due white in round 4, and it's not necessary. It's not really not true here. Y has color equalization in play because Y has already played 3 games, so she's going to get to play white in round 4. So board 1 is going to be Y versus Z. That's the top 2 players in the tournament.
Mike, can I? I think this should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway. So if you actually the 2 guys on 2.5, and the 2 folks on 2, if you actually paired them all together, you would fix all your color issues. But the important thing is keeping those people together in their score groups. You want those 2 2.5s playing each other, and that really takes priority over the correcting of all of your color issues that you would get by pairing the 2.5s with the 2s. For the integrity of the tournament, you need to keep that score group together. So just to point out the obvious, you don't drop them.
And if I recall, that's the second priority is maintain score groups.
Yep.
In your sequence, right after don't play the same person. Okay, so now let's look at question number 3. So who is T going to play, and what color is T going to play? All right, so T is in the 1.5 score group with 2 other players, W and that unrated player, Q. So somebody's going to drop down from the 1.0 score group to the 1-point group because I got 3 players in the 1.5 score group. I'm going to drop someone down. So T happens to be the lowest of the rated players in the 1.5 score group. I'm not going to drop the unrated. I'm going to preserve 29 delta 1. So T gets dropped down and is going to be paired as part of the 1.0 score group. So there you can see in this particular matrix here, I'm laying out that I'm annotating that T is dropping down into the next score group. I've lined out R because that's the player we've already decided is going to get the force buy. And I've got everyone's opposition, who they played, as well as their color histories here. And those are the facts that we're now going to use. And when we go to the next page, I'm going to take player T and slide him up under player Q so that he's at, quote, the top of the 1.0 score group now. So it'll look like those 2 players are out of sequence, but I did that for a reason, for ease of viewing. So as we continue working this one, there's those players who have to get paired. And as you can see, I've taken player T, dropped him underneath player Q so that he, looks like he's at the top of the 1.0 score group now. So as you remember, the 1.0 score group only had 2 players in it. Now it's got 3. So we'll deal with that problem in a few minutes. So here we've got W and Q that are remaining players in the 1.5 score group. So those 2 players are playing on board 3. And because Q had a bye in round 2, W is going to get to play black and equalize his colors. So now what do we do about the other 4? So this is where it gets really complicated. U has to play S because U has already played P and T. So that player is out for player U and that player is out for player U. The only person he can play is player S, which then leaves you with this unusual looking pairing of a 1.5 point player, T, against the unrated player who's only got a 0.5 point. Okay, so T is going to play P on board 4, getting his due color and equalizing his colors. U plays S on board 5, with U getting his due color and also equalizing his colors. So we'll talk. These are the what I would, those are the by the book recommended pairings. So the correct answer would be D, that none are correct. Now, there's an alternate pairing here that is in my opinion, as a tournament director, is reasonably good and it's viable and it makes a lot of sense. And some of you may have actually come up with that alternative pairing where T is playing W, because I've got these 2 players here. Look at the core. I can equalize both of them. It looks really nice. U is playing against Q. Okay, and P is playing against S. Nobody's playing each other twice. It looks good, and it's one that you could use. But the only way that one works is because you drop down that unrated player into the 1.0 score group. That's what makes that work in that manner. So Chris or Ernie, any comments?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing to remember here, pair the rules. You shouldn't be dropping that unrated player.
Right.
One thing to remember is unrated means they don't have a rating. But of course, unrated players always end up at the bottom of their respective score group just because they don't have a rating. But it doesn't mean they're rated lower than everybody else in that score group. They could be anywhere. We just don't know yet. So you can't really treat them as the lowest guy with a rating in that score group. And hence the rule of not dropping the unrated player all the time, because they're not necessarily the lowest, strength-wise player in that score group. And so this just, to me, the alternative pairings make a lot of sense. But if you specifically went by the rules, you're looking at the recommended pairings.
And the other point I would add here is that, as a director, you do have the right as a director for pairing purposes to assign a player a rating. I mean, and I'm not talking about you've got a foreign player who showed up in U.S. chess unrated and they got a FIDE rating. You can just quickly translate that. That's easy. But it's quite possible that, you're at the club level and you're about to start a club tournament with 13 players in it, and there's a new player who joined the club. And you've seen on chess.com, the player's got about a 1500 blitz rating. The player may have a US chess blitz rating or a quick rating. Those are all indicators. And you as a tournament director would be well within your rights to assign that player a rating for pairing purposes. So you could take Q, that 1.5 player, and for pairing purposes, assign them a rating of 1300, 1500, 1200, whatever you feel is appropriate. And then SwissSys, all you do is put a negative in front of the rating. So you enter the player's rating as negative 1200, and it still shows up in the printout as unrated. But when it comes to SwissSys and doing the pairings, that unrated player is going to get dropped down, as an example. If he or she is the lowest in the score group, based on that assigned pairing that you're giving under Rule 28, then that player could end up dropping down. Ernie, Chris, any comments on assigning players ratings like that?
No, so the only thing I would mention with that is, if you look at the rules, the unrated players actually give you a lot of flexibility in terms of when you're looking at equalizing and alternate, the alternation and equalizing for colors. So unrated players should actually be treated as they don't have issues with the 80 and 200 point rules. They basically, because they don't have ratings, you're not going to violate the 80 and 200 point rules for transpositions and interchanges if you're using and utilizing an unrated player. So you do sort of lose a little bit of flexibility on that front. I don't know quite how the pairing programs deal with it. If you assign them a negative rating, whether it would still, I assume, that it's then going to pair him as the lowest rated player in that group and drop him, which might not necessarily be the right thing to do. So you do lose out on some flexibility. But that, unrated players, I mean, you run into them, as often as you run into unrated players. So if you have a lot of unrated players, chances are your tournament is not, that strong a tournament. And a lot of times with the lower rated tournaments like that, I'm not saying you don't take them as seriously as the top ones, but sometimes you get a little more flexibility and a little more leeway.
Yeah, other times I will assign a player who's unrated. I may be loading up from the rating supplement and the player's unrated in the rating supplement, but I look online and the player's played 8 games already because they played in 2 tournaments. They played in a Saturday tournament and a Sunday tournament last weekend. Right. And now the player's showing up in MSA as having played 8 games, has got 1190 rating. That's a really good reason to put that player in and not call him unrated. It's not a quote published rating because it's not in the rating supplement yet, but that's a fair reason for you as a director to assign that player a rating for pairing purposes. And in a case like that, I would inform the individual, look, I'm not going to pair you as unrated. You're not unrated anymore. You've had 8 games in your records. So I'm going to use that 1190 rating to pair you according to your parent strength that we have. And the player's not going to push back on that. They're not going to say, oh, by the rule book, you have to pair me as an unrated, blah, blah, blah. That argument won't fly that far, in front of the rules committee on an appeal. So in that case, I would assign the player the 1190 rating and not put a negative sign in front of it, so that the player shows up as an 1190 in the pairing sequence, and it's clear. So.
Yeah, and then I think this is the last slide for pairing. So just a couple of general comments regarding using pairing software. Of course, the pairing software has a lot of settings that you can manipulate and change as you go along. And depending on what you do with those settings may cause different pairings to appear. And a lot of the times the pairings are not correct because of the TD has the incorrect settings for pairing strictly by the US chess rulebook. So just be very aware of that when you're using WinTD and SwissSys to do pairings. And then also the other thing is, and it's a little technical, but when these programs are doing pairings, they can actually output some sort of pairing logic, which may or may not help you determine how the computer came up with those pairings. I know sometimes the pairing logic can be a lot more complicated, looking at that and trying to work out what the pairing logic did without even looking at it and just working through the pairings yourself. So just be aware that, you are, as a tournament director, you are sort of expected to know why the computer paired the way it did and be able to sort of explain it. So there's the pairing logic that Mike's showing. With lots of arrows here coming up with natural pairings and white paired things, and why some people move to a certain level, etc. And it's an art form in itself, trying to read and understand the pairing logic. And we could spend a whole session doing that, but let's not.
I just wanted to. So thanks, Chris, for bringing up that. All of my expertise is in SwissSys. I have zero expertise in WinTD, but I'm sure WinTD has the similar issues in terms of switches that you got to have on and off. So
exactly.
Okay.
If I may make a point before we move on.
Yeah.
When I consider whether to drop an unrated in a tournament like this one, I will also consider how it affects the people who are playing for their chances for prizes. For instance, when we dropped the 1100 T, I think it was.
Yeah.
He ended up playing a unrated player, if I think, rather than playing the 1400 player. So that not necessarily means he's got a one game, but it makes it a little easier for him than if he had to play the 1400 player. So that's another consideration in addition to color that you might take when you're considering players to drop.
Yep.
And I think it's already been said that the key for unrated players is to get them that the 4 games. Hence why in the rulebook it does say, if you're looking at a 4-round tournament, you can actually move up score groups to give the full point buy to other people rather than give them the unrated. I think it says you can move up 1 score group, but I think as Jeff explained the other day, we really want that unrated player to get at least to a provisional rating. So it makes a lot of sense. I think once they've played 4 games, then you could, just go ahead and treat them like any other player for the 5th round, 6th round, or whatever. It's just very important to get them those 4 games.
All right, so we're going to switch gears a little bit now and talk about awarding prizes. So, it's US Chess Rule 32 that talks all about prizes. And the key is down here at the bottom is this: if a player is eligible for both and both are cash prizes, then the price with the higher cash value is the prize the player is going to get. And there are instances, where you can have, like, if for example, in a very large tournament, like some of the ones Bill Goischberg runs, or the U.S. Open as an example, or the World Open, or the North American, you can have, just the under 2,200 section alone's got 250 players in it, and you're handing out 10 place prizes. So you may have some class prizes that are worth a little bit more than like your 8th, 9th, and 10th place. So that's reasonable, as opposed to your your 25 player event where you're giving out 3 prizes, maybe 4 for place, and then you have several class awards. And that's probably a better example of a time where you wouldn't want under in class awards exceeding the value of, your second or third place prizes. But we'll see some examples of how that impacts things as we go through this. So you got to be careful with withdrawals. And the reason I say that is because, I've had a player in the state championship here in Virginia that's come to me, after it was 6-round tournament, and after round 5 has 5 points. And the next player after him's got 3.5. And he's saying, I'm just taking a bye. I want to take a 0-point bye in the last round and I'm out of here. And just you can pay me now. I'm like, I'm sorry. The deadline for bye requests was 30 minutes before the start of round 2. If you take a 0-point bye now, you're out of the tournament. That means you get nothing. So that you have to make sure your players are clear about when are the bye requests. And it's not just half-point buys. It includes 0-point buys. So, a player who's coming up to me after round 5 and saying, I'm the clear winner, nobody can catch me. I'm going to have 5.5 points or 5 points and nobody can catch me. Then I'm out of here. Well, you've just withdrawn from the tournament is what's happened. If you take a 0-point bye and keep your 5 points, nobody's going to catch you, I acknowledge, but you've just withdrawn from the tournament. The other one is this at the very bottom, the second bullet underneath events with based on. And this is right out of the rule book. If the total prize fund is more than $5,000, then you got to pay out 50% of each prize. Even if you're planning on, if you've got a $2,000 event and you're planning at being based on 100 players and you only got 46 showed up, you still paying out 50% of that. You can't go down below 50% and use 46 over 100 as a ratio to pay out your prizes. And every prize has to be paid at the 50% level. The only thing you don't have to pay is a prize for somebody's not eligible. Then you can keep that money, or you can allocate it to the other prizes. That's your call as a TD, but there's nothing says that you have to reallocate that money. You can keep that money and not pay that under whatever, or that class whatever, or that, whatever prize that you were going to give out. But at a minimum, if you have a turnout that's less than what you expected, and that turnout is greater than 50%, you got to pay it at least in proportion to the turnout. And we'll see that in the examples we talk about in a few minutes.
May I talk, Mike?
Yeah.
I have a disagreement with you on the very first thing under withdrawals. I've had this discussion with other TDs about whether a 0-point buy, which is something that comes out of Swiss Sys to leave them not paired but eligible for prizes. So it's not truly a buy. And the bad thing about what you were just saying is the best way to handle it is, okay, so this player that won the tournament clear, he gets paired, and he's going to play a player, and he's probably just going to dump that last game and get out of there as quickly as possible, which means his opponent is going to get a free point, and that will change how the prizes, prizes below the top prize are going to be awarded. So I think using the 0-point buy setting in Swiss Sys, you can do that in the last round. That's the way I work. And I don't really consider it a buy. I consider it he's taking a loss, but remaining eligible for prizes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's clearly that's something you can do. So really what you have to do is think through these situations in advance and make sure that when you have your pre-event rules, if you will, that these are the kinds of things that you give consideration to. And as Ernie has articulated, you recognize what's the downside of literally forcing the player to stay and play another game that he or she's just going to throw anyway, because they have no reason to win it. And yeah, sure, half the players will play for pride and want to, not lose some rating points when they didn't have to, but the other half are just like, hey, look, I want to get out of here as fast as I can. And in some ways, you're almost setting the conditions for a complaint against, for a complaint by a player saying, oh, it's almost prearranged, because I heard Joe and Sally talking out in the hallway, and Joe said he was going to make 15 moves and then resign, and that just goes a dangerous path. So I think Ernie's point is very, very well taken here. All right, so let's talk about a tournament. We got a tournament that has got 43 players in it. You have the standings there that it's, after the tournament is over, it's all the way through round 6, and tie breaks are turned on in this particular listing because this tournament's got plaques and trophies involved. And you don't want to give the plaque or trophy to the player who's on top of the score group, and you're not sorting it in tie-break sequence because it might not be that player. So that's why, and this is a very good example where you need to have 2 sets of results printed out, as you're the TD, double checking what the computer is telling you is how to award the prizes. So you got it with the tie breaks and you got it without the tie breaks so that you can see how things, lay out. So let's see. Okay, so it's pretty clean. The top 2 players had 5 points. So they split the first and second place money. And on tie breaks, tie break number 1 gives the plaque to the FIDE master and not to the GM. Third place is split between 3 players with 4.5 points. So they each get $150. So they each get a piece of that $450. In addition, the top female player was a special award, and it's not a prize that can be shared for this event. So in the pre-event publicity, it was listed as a special award. So that player, that top female player, gets that $200 bonus, if you will. And you could specify in your prize structure that the top female player would be the player who doesn't otherwise win a place prize. You could do that. So it's how you define your prize for a special prize is what's important, and that's that tells you where the money goes. And a lot of, I know Swiss Sis doesn't have a way to check a block for a top female player. It doesn't have that. So you have to manually award that prize. It's not going to give it to you in your prize structure. I don't know if NTD has a capability or not, but I know Swiss Sis doesn't. So a lot of special prizes, top junior, top player under 10 years old. It'll do top unrated, but some of the special prizes that you can come up with, it just simply won't put them in the structure. Swiss Sis will do top upsets, but Swiss Sis won't do best game, or fastest mate. Those kind of special prizes, you can't do them in the pairing program. So in the top expert category, I got player I, and it's Women's International Master here, splitting the amount of money for that top expert prize, and with player I getting the trophy. And then you have only 1 player's qualified for the top class A, and only 1 player down here's qualified for the under 1800. And oh, by the way, that was the only player, in there that was under that rating, at least at the top of the score sheet. So let's see what we had on the other page here. Do up one more. So I did have a few other under 1800s. So there was a pile of players that were eligible there. All right. So now we're going to move on to another example. With different prize structure. And this time what's changed, besides the cash amounts, these are a little bit different. I think before it was $650 and $450 right here. Now I've changed these to be under awards. They're not class awards anymore. I mean, they're a type of class award. They're not based on class A, class or expert or class B. These are strictly under awards. And sometimes that makes a huge difference. So what's changed is and the other thing that's changed here is the fact that I've got under prizes now that are, these two in particular, that are at least the same as or greater than my third place prize. So that can affect things in your final result. So let's see what it does. So I still got the same first two players splitting, but now they're splitting $1,600. That's why they each get, I'm sorry, $1,500. That's why they each get $750. Third place now, since it's dropped down, they're only getting $100 a piece, and the top female is still getting the $200. But now that under 2,200 trophy and the under 2,200 cash prize and the trophy associated with it, there's more than what was going to be awarded for the class prize. So actually, I think it's the same. But the point is, I've now got a situation where two players, player I, in this case, actually player K, player 9 and 11 in this sequence here, those two players are getting more money than the three players up here, except for the female player. So it can have some interesting effects on things. Of course, if this right here was, you know, three players that were tied in that category, they would still be getting more than those higher rated players up here. And sometimes that kind of that type of a prize structure setup can rub some of the higher rated players wrong, because it looks like what you're trying to do is to give more money to the lower rated players. And that may be what you're trying to do, because maybe you're trying to attract more lower rated players to play in your event. And that you have it on good authority from talking to some of the higher rated players that they're not going to say, oh no, well, I'm going to pass on your tournament just because the top under 2,200 is $50 more than third place. But it's just a trade-off. Is it wrong? No, it's not wrong. But I think it's much more common in an event that's large, or, either the section is large or the event is large, and you've got a lot of place prizes, like 1 through 8 or 1 through 10. And so you may be having class prizes that are worth more than some of the lowest of the place prizes. But I just wanted to show you that effect. So I put in another example that we'll look at in just a moment. But the question that I want to ask before we go to that is, which of these two schemes do you prefer? Where the under class awards are less than the lowest paying place prize, or that they're more. It's up to you. And it's like I've explained, how you use them depends on the format for your event. Big events, probably not an issue. Small events where you only 20 people, you're paying first to third place, having under prizes being worth more than third place, maybe that's not what you want to do. So for grins, I put in a tournament, the same tournament that we've been looking at for the last two examples, but now I've added a top master award in there. Yeah, it's going to cost another $350 out of pocket for the organizer, but I put in a top master award to see how it may affect things. So where you can see is now those players that finished in third previously were splitting that $450 three ways. Now they're throwing that top master money in there as well, because I got three players. I've got three players and two prizes that are pulled in and pooled together. So now those masters are making some pretty decent, a pretty decent payday for them. So they pull all that money up. These masters here that have 4 points, they got nothing. They're walking home empty-handed. And then the other prizes still pay out as they did before. But you can see the effect of me adding in another class award on top of what we had before. And these are the kinds of things, these little what-if drills that you can do as a tournament director before your event, so that you understand, how the implications may be on your tournament. And you could use, if you ran this same tournament last year, or you have the Swiss Sys or the WinTD files from last year for the same event, you could use those numbers, those final round standings, and play around with your prize structure and see, oh, yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe I could put this in, or maybe I should take that out, or maybe I should decrease this amount and increase that one. And you can see how your prize structure gets affected by, using your numbers from last year. And it's a really good, it's one indicator that says how, changing your prize structure would change up how you would that same event with identical results this year. And of course, the results won't be identical, but it's giving you some indicators about how things may look irregular or just look a bit unusual for your tournament. Chris or Ernie, anything you want to say about prize awarding prizes?
Yeah, so one thing we really didn't touch on was the situation of where we bring in under prizes and we add in players who are not eligible necessarily for that under prizes.
Yeah.
If the under prize is higher. So for instance, in this last example, if you take that top master and turn that into a top under 2300 prize, you would end up with the same prizes being given out basically to the same 4.5 point score group, even though the IMC there is not eligible for the under 2300 prize theoretically, because the top under 2300 instead of top master now, as we're calling it, the 350 there, if they just split that prize, it would be $175 each. As you can see, if they actually split that prize with the third place 450, they earn more money. And so we basically add in IMC, even though he's not really eligible for the under 2300 prize, and give them all a share of third and top under 2300. So the one thing we don't do is split third three ways, like give them all 150 each, and then give players 4 and 5 an additional $175 each on top of that. So because it's unfair for the guy finishing third, they all finished third, and so they all should get a split of that money. So it's really complicates the prize pools a lot when you take these sort of examples into account. It's something you will come across quite a bit if you're doing under prizes where you have players not eligible for a specific prize, but they get a portion of that prize. There are ways to word it so they're not actually getting a portion of that prize. I've seen color coding prizes and various things mentioned, but I just wanted to mention that if that top master was actually a top under 2300 prize, the prize payout would actually remain the same, which may confuse a lot of people.
Okay, so let's look at a few other thoughts about cash prizes. Assume in this specific example, it's a over 1600 championship for some town or club or whatever, and you got a $5,000 prize based on 130 players, but only had 73 people show up because the weather was bad. So assume your TLA advertised 1st to 5th as cash, as well as cash for these particular under prizes here, 2,200, 2,000, and under 1,800. So how are you going to adjust your prize structure and account for the loss of 57 players? Well, should I guarantee all my place prizes and then reduce the under awards? Should I reduce the place prize payouts by a ratio? And because that's where all the big money is to start with, but then don't adjust the top under awards. Well, those are techniques, and technically by the rule book, there wouldn't be anything wrong with them because you're paying out more than the ratio here, and you're paying out at least the ratio there, and you're paying out the ratio for the place prizes in example B, and you're not taking any money away from the under award. So technically you're not violating the rule book. But if you do something like C, I'm going to eliminate the 4th and 5th place prizes and the top under 1,800. And so I can take that money and pocket it or throw a little bit of it at the others and just award that instead. And I would definitely not do that. Just breaks the rules badly. So what really should you do? Well, a technique, is to look at how you advertise your event. So I'm going to show you several different ways about, how you can advertise your event and help you structure your money later. So, if I advertise first to fifth place guaranteed, I can't change those with a low total amount. I have to pay. If my fifth place prize was $450 and I only had 73 players, I still got to pay $450 for that fifth place prize. And the same on up the ladder all the way to first place. So guaranteed means you can't change them. Now, as we said earlier, the exception to this is if all the event prizes that you have all are less than $500. When it's less than $500, the ratio that's there really doesn't apply anymore. You don't have to pay the minimum 50%. All right, so if I advertise as $5,000 based on some number of players, in this case, we did $5,000 based on 130 players. I can use a ratio in that case. And the ratio is the minimum. So if the minimum prize for, using your ratio of 73 over 130, let's pretend that a minimum, that a ratio came up to be, $135.15. And you can say, well, I'm just going to round that down to $130. Technically, that player can protest because you went below the ratio amount. The ratio is the minimum. Some tournaments, and I see them in Maryland, where it's just a guaranteed amount of money for a score. So if you get a perfect score in a 5-round event, $1,250. You get 4.5, $750. You get 4, $300. And it's just based solely on your score. So there is no first, second, third, and top, under, and stuff like that. It's based on what you score. And those are pretty common up in Maryland. I see them. There may be other places. Chris, have you seen those anywhere across the country?
No. I mean, I've heard of people running them, but I'm not on those levels. But yeah, no, it's usually much smaller events for sure. I mean, I've definitely know of them, but I haven't been part of them.
Okay. And you can come up with hybrids of the above. For example, you can say anybody scores first, anybody gets 5 points, that player's going to get a $1,000 bonus. Boom. You can do that. And then you're still paying out first, second, and third as guaranteed money or as some ratioed money. It's all how you structure your prize scheme. I would use a ratio to reduce everything equally, and I'll show you how I do that. When I get ready for tournaments, I usually create a ratio table using Microsoft Excel. And I have that thing ready so that it's going to give me some indicators of where my price structure needs to be in this case. So for example, my tournament was based on 130. You can see at the bottom, I based it on 130. And my original prize payout was that column that says original, it totals up to 5,000. So if I have 120 players and I use 120 over 130 as my ratio, that's how it comes out. I use 110 over 130, that's how it comes out, and so on down the line. So I know for my event here, where I had 73 over 130, I'm going to be somewhere above 70 and below 80. So I'm in that range right there. So let's pretend for this discussion that I actually had 80 players and I was using the 80 column. I've already set my Excel formula to round up. So it's not rounding down, it's rounding up for my answers. So if I could say, okay, so I'm going to take this 1108, I'm not going to round that down to 1100 because now I'm going below 80 over 130. I'm going to say, I'm going to round it up to 1110. I'm going to take the 615 and leave it alone. I take the 338 and move it up to 340 or 350. Take the 215, leave it alone. Make the 154 be 155. Make the 111 be, say 115 for all of these guys. 110 there, leave 95 alone. But that's the kind of thing you do as a director. Another thing is in Virginia, for some of our large state tournaments, we'll have a discussion, the chief tournament director will have a discussion with the president of the Virginia Chess Federation. And the president of the Virginia Chess Federation may say, hey, look, it was bad weather. Nobody expected that to happen. I really want to go ahead and pay out as much of the original prize fund as we can for the people that came here, because they kind of defied the odds and came to the event despite the bad weather. That snowstorm didn't keep them away. So treasurer, talking at Virginia Chess Federation board of directors level now, can we afford to put an additional $500 or $1,000 back into the prize fund and get it closer to our original amount? And if treasurer says, yeah, sure, we made a lot of money in our state scholastic tournament, so we've got the money, we can do that. But that's the kinds of discussions that you can have as a director, especially when you're running an event where the organizer has a substantial pocketbook to play with. Because the organizer may say, hey, look, I didn't guarantee 5,000, but I think 80 out of 100 people showing, 80 out of 130 showing up, I don't want to go down that low. Let's bring it up to the 100 level, and let's pay out 3,900 instead and recalculate the numbers using 3,900. But those are the kinds of discussions you have as a director. Of course, it's out of your own pocket, and you're the organizer. Maybe you go with your formula, to the dollar and to the cent. Because if you're paying with a checkbook, you can pay to the penny. Whereas if you're paying cash, it's a lot harder to pay to the penny, because then you round up rounding up to the nearest dollar or $5 or something. Anyway, so checkbook gives you that flexibility to pay out to the to the specific penny. But I just wanted to show you that I use this as a tool that, I use it in all of my events, so I can kind of see where, what my actual turnout will look like and how it's going to impact my prize structure.
And just on that front, sorry, Mike.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just on that front, if you're using one of the pairing programs they all have the capability to input a prize structure into the program. So you can have the pairing program automatically, produce these prizes for you, but they won't do the rounding and stuff. So if you have $1 and a 3-way prize, you'll see Swiss will give everyone 33 cents, which means
Right.
you didn't pay out the full dollar. So
Right.
I've worked for organizers that wanted me to just round up to the cent. I've worked for organizers that want me to round up to the nearest dollar. Organizers want me to round up to nearest $10 to make it easy, and multiple things. But at least with Swiss, just be aware that it might be off by a cent here or there. So.
Okay, so we have about 12 or so, 15 minutes left. So I'm going to go through a few of the questions that came in from from those of you attending this call and who attended the call on Thursday, some of the questions that came up. Is it possible for a player to have 3 consecutive whites or blacks? Well, yeah, absolutely. In a 4-round tournament, the last round exception can kick in, and you can very definitely have someone playing 3 blacks or 3 whites. It's not everybody can be equalized on colors based on how how all the games have been going. Quad pairings. I think the trick that I've learned about quads is 2 things. First of all, when I run a tournament and I'm going to be having quads, I know from history that this specific event typically will generate 4 quads or 5 quads or 3 quads. So I'll create the shells for those right away. So if I know I'm going to have probably 4 or 5, I may create 6 or 7 quads, blank. They're empty. There's nobody in them. But I'm also going to create a small Swiss. And then when I register my players, I'm dumping them all into another file, another Swiss system file. And then I can just drag them and drop them. I can take the top 4 players and put them in the first quad. Take the next 4 players that are left, throw them in the second quad, and so on. So that by the time you're finished, maybe you end up with 5, 6, or 7 players who are left over. And you can't make a quad out of 1 or 2 or 3 people. So you take that last quad, if you will, and you throw those players into your small Swiss. And now I have a small Swiss with 5, 6, or 7 players, and they play, in a Swiss system format. And you can also have them play in the same round robin format that's dictated in the rule book for 7 players, but you're only going to play 3 rounds. But I just make it a small Swiss. And often when I add in, especially if I get 6 or more players in that small Swiss, I'll add another prize in there. And it could be, I could add a 3rd place prize, and I think, Chris, you brought it up last time, I might throw in, since your last Swiss has got your lowest rated players in it, maybe I got a top unrated award or a top under 1200 award that I throw in there instead of a third place prize. But I shy away from, oh, well, I got 7 players. I'm going to just pocket those entry fees for those 3 players above the 4 people for the Swiss. So I'm going to just pocket, the $10 entry fee for those 3 players and be happy with it. As opposed to what I like to do, go ahead and pay some of that money back out to the players because you got a little bit larger section. And the players in the other quads are not going to complain and moan about it because it's just the way it is. And you can keep first and second the same amount, but now you're playing a third prize as well, or you're playing paying a top under 1200 or a top under 1500 or a top unrated or whatever you want to do. And I'll talk more about that in question 7.
Mike?
Yeah.
One thing here, this says to create the bottom quads into a Swiss. And I have done slightly different occasion. I will look at, because one of the theories that I think a quad is good for is having playing opposition who's fairly close to you in rating as possible. Sometimes I'll look and see that if I make the Swiss out of the top players, that more equally assumes you will get good, strong players in all 3 of your games. So
okay.
You don't necessarily have to make the bottom into the Swiss.
Okay. Impacts when someone drops out. It's not at all uncommon where you going into the final round of a tournament, or you going into the next to last round of a tournament, the penultimate round kind of thing, when all the players are looking at the results of the previous round and they go back to their room or they go back to their car or they go sit out in the lobby of the hotel or whatever, and they're booking up on who they know they got to play next. Player A knows he's playing player B next, but has no idea that player B has already walked up to the tournament director and said, I'm sick. I'm going to withdraw. I can't play in the last round. So now the round gets paired, and A is there just dumbfounded that he spent the last 45 minutes booking up with chess base playing against what he knows player A always plays, which is E4. And he knows he's going to be playing black, and so he's getting ready. But he shows up, now he's playing someone else, and he's playing a different color than what he thought he was going to be playing. So don't be surprised when some player comes up and says, it's not fair. If I knew that Johnny or player A was going to withdraw, I could have prepared to play the right person. That's your fault. You should have let me know. All those kinds of scenarios is what the players will come up with. But hey, it's chess, and stuff happens, and there's nothing you can do about it. And to be quite honest, about the only thing that I could do is if I would not pick up the phone and let one player know, hey, you're not going to be playing who you thought you were going to play. You could be playing someone else. That's really unfair. It's unsportsmanlike as a director. As opposed to, you had some tentative pairings posted on your website, and you hurry up and you revise your pairings and you repost the pairings, and you send out your text mail, your text message blast to all the players that said, hey, we had a player withdrew, the pairings have been redone, they're up there and they're fresh again. That's the best you can do. That's giving everybody the same chance to access the information, as opposed to, hey, I knew that this GM thought he was going to play this other GM, but that GM withdrew because he's sick. And now I called the other GM and told him that, hey, look, you're not going to be playing that guy anymore. That's just unfair, because I'm not doing that for every round and every player in the tournament whose pairing may get affected in some way. You can drop, next question, you can drop down someone other than more than 2 score groups. And I mostly see this, or almost exclusively see this, when you've got team play involved. And, when I run team tournaments, whether they're at the national level with US Chess, or at the state level here in Virginia, or in some other event that I'm, been hired to work for, I always make sure that the team rules are very, very specific in terms of when do the team codes get turned off in terms of when a player is going to be, not allowed to play. I mean, when are they going to be allowed to play teammates? Some tournaments will say, I don't care about team structure. Team points just come from team points, and we're using natural pairings throughout. I've gone in our national scholastic events, we have specific rules in the scholastic regulations that tell the backroom chief and the chief TD of the tournament when do the team codes get turned off. It's very specific in the rules. So just realize when you've got team play that if you intend to leave the team pairings on throughout a tournament and you've got a large team in there, you're really going to have some weird pairings as you start getting into later rounds. Chris or Ernie, anything you want to say about this particular question?
Yeah, I mean, I find it also happens a lot when you have a low number of players with a lot of rounds. So,
yeah.
Obviously, if you're going to try and avoid people playing each other again twice, we had the US Championship one year, 24 player Swiss, 9 rounds. The player at the top eventually had met all the players just underneath him and had to drop quite a few score groups to meet the other players. So, so it happens if you get that little combination too.
Okay. Posting different sections based on rating, when the turnout is low or less than 25 players. And we do this a lot in scholastics where, you may have had a K-12 championship section and a K-12 under 1400 section. And you're playing 6 rounds, but your K-12 championship section, for whatever reason, had very, very few players. So you combine the 2 sections into one. That's not at all uncommon in scholastic. It's a bit more unusual, I would say, in your adult events, especially where you're paying prize money. So if you have any possibility of having to combine sections based on the history of that event, I would definitely make sure I'm listing that in my pre-tournament publicity, especially like on my website or as part of registration, so that players know that, hey, look, there's a possibility I may end up combining, the K5 section with the K3 section if the 2 sections are so small that I'm not really getting, I can't get my 6 rounds out of it without having people playing each other twice. Ernie, any comments?
Nope.
Okay. We talked about this a lot. No, the computer programs don't always pair correctly. The computer is only as smart as you tell it. So, what do you look for as a director? I look for something that's out of place and unusual. Like the big one that sticks out is if my unrated is not being paired in the 4th round of the tournament. That's one that, okay, something's set wrong. Let me take a look and let me redo the pairings right quick. Or do I really need to be letting that unrated sit out? Because I know, as a matter of fact, he's already got 4 games in his record. They're just not showing up because he played in a tournament last weekend and picked up 4 games, 6 games, or 8 games. And so it's not a problem now. So it's not that big of a deal because he or she really isn't, quote, that sacrosanct unrated who needs that 4th game. But look for things that are unusual. And I give a story right here about one of our national scholastics where the computer was spitting out for the 2nd round, spit out completely random pairings. And the directors, none of us saw it. And his couple parents came to us and said, look, you got a 1900 playing a 1920 in round 2. What? And we weren't using accelerated pairings. Even then it would be weird. And so what we found out was Alan Priest was actually doing the pairings on this one, the U.S. chess president. And Alan couldn't figure out what was doing it. Alan paired it again, and it came out same random pairings, but different players this time. So Alan actually had to take the WinTD file, the player file, and load it in another computer and pair it on that computer and then use that computer for the rest of the tournament. Because we never figured out what was going on while the tournament was in progress. And at the end of the tournament, we figured out that there was a switch that had been used to generate random pairings was actually turned on. And because it's so rarely used, Alan had no idea where it was in WinTD. So, it happened. Nobody knows how that switch got turned on, but it did because it wasn't turned on for round 1. But in round 2, it just went bonkers on us. So look for stuff that's unusual. Nobody expects a director to be able to stand in front of the wall chart and just start rapping off. Okay, A is going to play this person, B is going to play this person, C is going to play that person. Here's what colors they're going to have. Chris or Ernie or I may better make a pretty good shot at that. But as Chris said, if you're looking at the wall chart, good luck. Especially when you got more than 10 players, because now I can't keep those pairing cards, mentally in my head and work that way. We talked about, this is that question 7 that I mentioned earlier, so I'm not going to talk about that one. In the last round, explain why color equalization prevents the 2 highest rated. My answer to that is my answer to that is it should not prevent from being paired. You have last round exceptions that can clearly kick in and have those 2 players. But if you got more than, 4 players, I think, or 4 or more players in that top score group, at the end, it doesn't have to be the 2 highest rated players playing against other. Chris or Ernie?
No, I mean, just obviously it makes sense. Just one little nugget of information sort of related to this. One of the reasons most tournaments are actually arranged of an odd number of rounds is to prevent a major color imbalance of 3 whites and 1 black, or 3 blacks and 1 white that you get with a tournament that's an even number of rounds, 4 rounds as opposed to 5 rounds. So with 5-round events, of course, everyone has to have a color imbalance, but you're not going to get 4 whites and 1 black, or you'll get 3 and 2, or 2 and 3 amongst all your players. You won't end up with a 4-1 ratio, or at least you shouldn't. So anyway, so that's just something relates to this. But if they're the only 2 highest rated players and they're the only 2 in that score group, of course, not the 2 highest rated players. If there are 6 players in the score group, you can't pair the 2 highest rated players together unless there are issues with people being paired, against each other already.
Yeah.
Then, it makes sense. If the only 2 in that score group, they haven't played each other, pair them and sort the colors out appropriately.
So, well, that's it. We've run out of time. We got accomplished what I wanted to, which was to work through the main material. We will be posting online within the next couple of days this version that you're seeing here, so that the additional questions that were submitted by people are answered and in here, as well as this audio recording. So you better use that and perhaps listen to things again or look at the additional questions, because I tried to pool together some of these questions. But I really appreciate everyone dialing in. And Carol Meyer, our executive director for U.S. Chess, has actually been our behind the scenes techie, working this to make sure that this Zoom teleconference goes off without a hitch. But I also want to thank NTD Chris Bird and NTD Ernie Schlick for being part of this call and lending your perspectives to what we talked about today. So look for more of these in the future. And I can anticipate, given some of the discussion that those of us who have been involved with these in the first 4 times we've done them so far, I can anticipate trying to make some of these be interactive, perhaps with a much smaller group, and diving in deep on a very specific topic, as in, quote, a master class on pairings, or a master class on prize awards, or a master class on how to avoid cheating, those kinds of things, or a master class on online tournaments, where you can have a lot more interaction between those of you that are participating. When you get more than 20 people, it's just difficult when everybody's got their hand in the air every question that comes up, and you just can't handle all the what ifs and so forth that people throw. But again, everyone, thanks for your time, and hope you stay safe and stay healthy. But this is Mike Hoffpauir signing off. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Mike. Great job.
Okay. Thanks, Carol.